Soul caster.
It happened so fast, I didn't even register the heat at first. Just the sound. That horrible, slapping splash of liquid against skin. Then the sting. Then the smell. Lobster bisque of all things. Boiling hot and seeping into my thighs, my chest, my neck. And still not a single sound from anyone at that godforsaken table. Just forks paused mid-air and eyes too cowardly to meet mine. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stood above me, her hand still grasping the empty porcelain bowl, the remnants of soup dripping from the rim like blood. "That's exactly what you deserve," she said, her voice smoother than the cream in the soup she'd just assaulted me with. And Nathan, my son, my only child, didn't even stand. He leaned back in his chair like this was just another awkward moment to be endured. "She's right, Mum," he said. And with that, he went back to slicing his salmon like nothing had happened. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I didn't even breathe, not until I felt the cloth napkin in my hand, patting the blistering skin on my chest while my eyes stayed bone dry. I stood up slowly, leaving the napkin stained and soggy on the antique cherrywood table Eleanor had generously loaned to Nathan and Paige after they bought this house. My dress clung to me, burning hot and reeking of brandy and shame. I walked out the front door without a word. Paige didn't follow. Ellie, my sweet granddaughter, tried to, but her mother caught her arm and whispered something I didn't catch. Something I'll never forgive. On the porch, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. The screen was slick from my own sweat. I scrolled past the contacts like a ghost, brushing through old memories. Past the church ladies, past the book club, past my cousin in Ohio, until I landed on one name, Rose. I hadn't called her in over a decade. I hit call, voicemail. Good. I took a shallow breath and said, quietly but clearly, "It's time, Rose." That was all. "You should know. I didn't plan any of this. I'm not some chess-playing mastermind with a journal full of revenge blueprints. But something about being told you deserve boiling soup on your skin by a woman who's worn fur to Easter brunch. It shifts something. Something permanent. You endure 1,000 little humiliations in silence. You overlook the way your daughter-in-law smirks every time you bring a homemade dish. The way your son looks through you when his wife is around. You tell yourself it's fine, that you're keeping the peace for the grandbaby's sake, that if you just smile and nod enough, one day they'll come around. But eventually someone crosses a line so brazen, so arrogant, that something primal inside you wakes up. It doesn't roar, it doesn't scream, it smiles, and it starts collecting receipts. By the way, if you're listening to this and somehow still not subscribed, do it now. Seriously. More than 99% of people don't follow, and I promise you the stories get even darker. It helps the team keep digging into the madness families like mine try to bury. Anyway, I went straight to urgent care after that. Said it was a kitchen accident. Let the nurse believe I'd knocked a pot over. She asked me 3 times if I felt safe at home. I said yes. Because technically I do. I live alone. And no one can hurt you in a place where no one else is allowed in. When I got home, I peeled off the dress, placed it gently in a garbage bag, and stuck it in the freezer. Evidence, in case I needed it. The bisque had stained the lace across the collarbone, my mother's lace. That's when I cried. Later that night, I opened a small metal box I hadn't touched in 12 years. It was tucked behind old teaching binders and forgotten tax documents. Inside was a yellowed manila folder with a fading label. Crawford Estate, not finalized. There were pictures in that box too. One of me and Rose as little girls, holding hands at the edge of a lake in upstate New York. One of our father, looking like a senator in a borrowed suit. And one of Eleanor, much younger, her mouth frozen in that same smug half-smile she wore today. Except in this one, she was standing in front of a house that didn't belong to her yet. At the bottom of the box was a key. I hadn't seen it in years, but I remembered exactly what it opened. A cedar chest in Rose's attic. The one we swore we'd never touch unless everything else failed. Well, it had failed. And Eleanor? Eleanor was about to remember the name of the woman her dead husband never legally divorced. Rose didn't call back right away. I didn't expect her to. The last time we spoke was through a note tucked into a Christmas card that neither of us signed. That's the kind of silence that ferments, until it's strong enough to strip paint. But I knew she'd understand what those 3 words meant. It's time, Rose. She was probably still in that same white clapboard house in North Carolina, the one her husband built with salvaged lumber and too many stairs. I pictured her at the kitchen sink, wearing one of those ridiculous aprons with embroidered chickens, hands dripping with lemon-scented suds and age. I imagined the slow, deliberate way she would sit when she heard my voice, her breath catching not from surprise, but from the fact that she knew this day would come. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the pain, though the blister on my thigh felt like someone had pressed an iron into it, but because I couldn't stop replaying Nathan's face in my head. She's right, Mum. Not shouted, not angry, just tired, like I was a burden they'd been waiting to shrug off. I raised that boy by myself. When his father died, I sold my engagement ring to keep us from losing the house. I walked to work every day for 2 years, just to pay for his speech therapy when he was 7. I stayed up helping him build volcanoes for science fairs, listening to him cry after middle school breakups, writing checks I couldn't afford for college applications he never thanked me for. And now I was the embarrassment, the woman who didn't know when to leave quietly. The next morning I put the soup-stained dress in a padded envelope and mailed it to myself, certified. Chain of custody, just in case. Then I called the courthouse. The clerk remembered me. Her voice perked up when I said my name, but I kept things brief. I asked for records from the Crawford estate, filed in 1996, closed in 1999. Her voice dipped. There was a dispute about the final notification, I think. Yes, there was. Eleanor's husband, Charles Crawford, had died in 96. By then, he'd already been living a double life for nearly 20 years. Married to Rose, never legally separated, never filed a single divorce document. Just up and left one day. And 6 months later, poof, he was engaged to Eleanor, society's darling. Rose never contested it, not even when Eleanor plastered her wedding across the newspaper, not even when the estate was divided up like a buffet line. Rose had her reasons. Mostly pride, some fear, a bit of both. Me? I stayed out of it. Told myself it wasn't my fight. I didn't want to be dragged through the mess, especially not with a teenage son and a crumbling job market. But I remembered the way Eleanor looked at Rose when they ran into each other once at the farmer's market, like she was a stain that had crept in from the sidewalk. At home, I pulled the metal box out again. The Crawford estate file was still intact. Inside, the unfinalized petition, 2 letters from the probate judge requesting confirmation of service, and a return envelope marked undeliverable, address unknown. It was unopened, never forwarded, just sent back and forgotten. Eleanor's people had claimed Rose refused to participate. Truth was, She'd never even been notified. Her legal claim had never been waived. It had just expired from dust and silence. But not anymore. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. Rose, I'm coming. Leave the light on. I stared at it for a long time. Not hi, not how are you, not even what happened. Just 3 sentences that cracked open 12 years of nothingness. It took her 2 days to arrive. She didn't knock when she came. Just walked in like no time had passed, like the last words we said to each other hadn't been in a hospital hallway while our mother died, both of us pretending the other didn't exist. She looked thinner. Her hair was bone white and pulled back so tight it gave her an expression of perpetual disapproval. But her eyes were the same, razor sharp. She took one look at me, bandages, limp, the quiet way I stood with my arms folded, and said, "Well, I suppose that bitch finally did something that woke you up." I didn't flinch. Instead, I handed her the manila folder and said, "You still have legal standing." She sat down, flipping through the pages slowly, like she was skimming a yearbook of old regrets. "Eleanor's going to lose her mind," she murmured. "Good," I nodded. "And I want Nathan to see it. Every crack, every fall, every illusion, shattered." Her mouth curved, just slightly. "Then let's get to work." Rose didn't bring luggage, just a cracked leather briefcase and the same cold composure she used to wear like a church hat. She slept on my pull-out couch without complaint, drank her coffee black, and by morning had organized every paper from the Crawford folder into color-coded tabs. She even labeled them. Fraud, inheritance, unfiled notice, timeline discrepancy. Watching her lay it all out on my dining room table felt like witnessing a surgeon prepare for an operation. We didn't talk about our mother, or the years we lost, or the fact that I hadn't invited her to Nathan's wedding. She didn't ask. I didn't explain. That's how we do things in our family. We bury the dead and the feelings in the same hole. Instead, I called a probate attorney, Samantha Cho, sharp, young, and not remotely impressed by old money. We sat in her cramped office between a taxidermied owl and a ticking grandfather clock that sounded like a countdown. Rose laid out the documents, and Samantha's eyes lit up like she'd found a live wire. "You're telling me Eleanor Crawford's marriage was never legal?" "Charles was still married to Rose when he remarried," I said, watching Samantha's pen freeze mid-air. "And the estate?" "Never properly resolved," Rose added, flipping to the envelope marked undeliverable. "They claimed I ignored court summons. I never received them." Samantha leaned back, calculating. "If this holds up, the Crawford estate is still in dispute. Any disbursements from that estate, including property, trusts, even Eleanor's wedding assets, could be challenged. Retroactively." Rose didn't smile. She just tapped the envelope. "Then we start there." I didn't care about the money. I needed Eleanor's foundation to crack. And I needed Nathan to see it fall, slowly, publicly. That night, I found Eleanor's old housekeeper, Judith, living in a tiny duplex near the train station. She answered the door in orthopedic slippers and a silk robe with cigarette burns. The moment she saw me, she winced. "I don't want trouble," she said. "I'm not here for trouble," I replied. "I'm here for the truth." She let me in. The apartment smelled like pine cleaner and regret. Judith remembered the wedding, remembered Eleanor hiding mail. She couldn't prove anything, but she told me something better. Eleanor used to brag that she fixed everything with a bottle of scotch and a favour. I asked her to write that down. She didn't hesitate. Next, I tracked down Charles Crawford's old business partner, David Lang. now retired, mostly forgotten. He met me at a diner and ordered plain toast. I always wondered how Eleanor landed on top, he said, sipping his tea. There was talk, you know, about a rushed ceremony, paperwork that vanished. Charles paid me off once, said it was best not to stir old ghosts. I told him the ghost was awake now. He didn't laugh. He just handed me a faded envelope. Inside was a letter from Charles, dated 6 months after his wedding to Eleanor. "I'm dealing with unfinished matters," it read. "If Rose finds out, it could all unravel." Then came Paige's ex-husband. Paige had erased him from family law, like he was a scratch on a photo. But I remembered him, a quiet man with eyes too soft for someone married to her. I found him through his sister, who still lived in the same zip code. "I always wondered why Paige was so desperate to marry up," he told me. "Her mother made it clear. Don't marry poor. Don't inherit shame." She said it like it was contagious. He also told me about the offshore account, the one Eleanor set up in Paige's name, hidden behind a charity fund that never actually donated $1. I didn't need proof yet. I just needed to shake the edges. And shake they did. 3 days later, Eleanor's lawyer called her in a panic. Someone had requested the Crawford estate file from county records. That same day, her foundation's legal counsel received an anonymous inquiry about the original endowment's origin. Rumors began to slither through the country club like champagne turning flat. At dinner that evening, Paige's tone was ice. "What is your mother doing?" she hissed to Nathan, loud enough for the waiter to flinch. Nathan didn't answer, because deep down, I think he finally realized he didn't know me at all. And that was the point. All those years I'd made myself small for the sake of peace. Smiling through Eleanor's barbed compliments, swallowing Paige's veiled jabs, nodding at Nathan's weak apologies and pretending that proximity counted as love. Now I wasn't raising my voice. I was turning the lights on. The email that cracked the first fault line came in at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. A formal notice from the law firm managing Eleanor's signature philanthropic initiative, the Crawford Fund for Women in Leadership. Just one sentence. "Pending the resolution of a newly filed estate claim tied to the Crawford inheritance, all disbursements, endorsements, and active grant agreements are to be temporarily suspended, effective immediately." The board was copied. So were 2 journalists, and the State Ethics Office. The timing wasn't accidental. Rose and I had planned it for months, but executed it in days. After her name reappeared on the Crawford estate records, it triggered a re-evaluation of every financial instrument derived from it, including Eleanor's prized charity, which, according to its glossy website, had helped over 1,000 underprivileged women achieve their dreams. Turns out only about 17 could be found. The rest? Untraceable. I didn't expose that. I simply let the cracks widen. Rose and I kept to ourselves. We were seen at the grocery store, at the courthouse. Quietly having tea on my porch, visible from the street Eleanor had to drive down every Tuesday on her way to the foundation office. We weren't loud, but we weren't hiding. And in this town, silence can be the most deafening sound of all. By Thursday, whispers were everywhere. That Margaret's sister was back. That something was happening with the will. That Eleanor had lied. People pretended not to stare at us in line at the bank. Pretended not to freeze when I entered the library. Pretended not to recall the gossip from 20 years ago about how Charles had left his first wife without a signature, without a trace, and how Eleanor had swept in like bleach. Nathan showed up unannounced that weekend. Red-faced, hands in fists, like the boy he used to be when he thought slamming a door made him right. "You're playing with fire," he said, standing in my kitchen like he didn't owe me so much more than a warning. I looked up from the counter where I was slicing peaches. "No," I said. "I'm just turning the stove back on." He stepped closer. "Why are you doing this?" I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned to face him. "You were the one who said I deserved it." He flinched. Just enough. "And maybe I did," I continued, "for staying silent for so long, for letting you believe respect was optional, for showing up to dinners where I wasn't welcome, because I thought it was my job to be small." "Mom, this," I said, voice calm, "is not about revenge. It's about truth, and you don't get to walk both sides of it anymore." He didn't have a response, just stood there, looking at the floor like he hoped it would swallow him. I let him leave without another word. That same afternoon, Paige lost her speaking slot at the State University's Women in Policy conference. The chairwoman cited ongoing ethical concerns surrounding her affiliated charitable network. The email they received had come from an anonymous sender. Attached was the original estate document, with a single-line note: "Before you endorse a legacy, make sure it was earned." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Eleanor, meanwhile, tried damage control. She issued a brittle press statement about malicious claims from estranged relatives and a smear campaign designed to distract from meaningful work. Her voice cracked on the radio interview, just slightly. A week later, a junior reporter ran a sidebar column titled, "Who is Rose?" The photo was old, grainy, clipped from a community newspaper decades ago, but the headline ran under Eleanor's interview. I clipped it, folded it, and left it in Eleanor's mailbox without a note. The following Sunday, Eleanor showed up to church wearing sunglasses indoors. That same day, Judith, the former housekeeper, called me. Her driver's been let go, the garden staff too. She's twitchy. I didn't respond. I was at the county recorder's office, requesting a full copy of Charles Crawford's original land titles. Not because I needed them, just because I could. Eleanor didn't know how much I knew. That was the beauty of it. Every day she lived inside a quiet question mark. How far will Margaret go? How many people has she spoken to? How much has Rose remembered? And the truth was, I hadn't even begun yet. The table was set with bone china, real silver, not plated, crystal glasses that hadn't seen the light of day since Nathan's wedding. I opened a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a birthday that no one remembered last year, and arranged 3 chairs on one side of the dining room table. I sat opposite, alone. Let them sit shoulder to shoulder. Let them feel united, until they weren't. They arrived almost theatrically late. Paige came first, carrying her silence like a clutch purse, followed by Nathan, whose face was locked in the expression men wear when they've been lectured all the way there. Eleanor entered last, her perfume arriving several seconds before she did. That scent, powder, rose, and cold steel, used to make me nauseous. Tonight, it made me smile. "Wine?" I offered, calm as glass. "No," Eleanor said, settling in like she was preparing for a trial. "Let's get to it." "Fine." I reached under the table and pulled out a black folder, unzipped it, and slid it forward with 2 fingers, like a dealer at a poker table. No preamble, no speech. Eleanor opened it. The silence that followed was so dense, you could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway swallow the room whole. Inside were 6 pages. The first, a certified copy of the original marriage license between Charles Crawford and Rose Delaney, dated 1972. The second, notarized documentation and proving no divorce decree had ever been issued in the state of New York. The third, the license of his second marriage to Eleanor, time-stamped 4 years later. The remaining three, Rose's petition to reopen the estate. Signed, stamped, filed. Nathan's voice cracked before his words did. "You can't be serious." I looked at him, slowly, like I was seeing him for the very first time. "You thought I was bluffing?" Paige reached for the folder, scanned the top page, and blanched. Her fingers trembled as she reread the header. Affidavit of marital fraud and petition for retroactive estate revaluation. "It's not real," Eleanor said finally. "It won't hold up." But she didn't sound certain, not like she used to. "It's already being reviewed," I said quietly. "We've hired counsel. Depositions begin next week." "But this destroys everything," Paige snapped. "Her entire identity is built on—" She cut herself off. I didn't. "Yes, that's the idea." Eleanor leaned back, trying to collect herself. Her lips curled in that signature sneer, the one I'd seen 1,000 times across 10,000 tables. "This is petty. You're pathetic." "No," I said, my voice low and even. "What's pathetic is assaulting an old woman at your dinner table and expecting applause." Eleanor turned to Nathan like he might save her, but he looked down. "Margaret," he said quietly, "you could have just—" "I could have," I interrupted. "I could have swallowed it. Again. Like I did when Paige erased me from wedding photos. When you stopped inviting me to Ellie's school events. When you told me to stop bringing food because Paige is sensitive to smells. When you let Eleanor throw soup on me and said I deserved it." I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the table. "This isn't revenge. This is balance. You tipped the scale. I just let it swing back." Eleanor's hands balled into fists in her lap. Her jaw clenched. "You've destroyed everything." I stood, slowly, deliberately, picked up my wineglass and walked to the door. "No," I said, turning back to look her dead in the eye. "You did that the moment you touched me." And then I left them there, 3 people bound together by entitlement and fear, staring into a future they couldn't control for the first time in their lives. I didn't look back, didn't wait for Nathan to call. He wouldn't. He'd spend the next few weeks trying to pick through the rubble, wondering which cracks were cosmetic and which ones reached the foundation. And me? I poured another glass of wine, stepped out onto my porch, and called Rose. "We're done," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She just exhaled, slow and satisfied. The sound of a ghost finally released. Let them rebuild if they can. But the ground beneath them, it's ash.